Hey everybody, Mike Rollins here again with another of my interviews with candidates and office holders, candidates for the 2026 nominations in the Democratic primary. So today I am joined by Jordan Wheatley, who is running for the nomination for the 3rd Congressional District. Say hi to everybody, Jordan.
Hi, everyone.
So what we'd like to do to start off with here is give Jordan the chance to uh, introduce himself, to some, the usual 1 or 2 minute elevator speech, and then we'll get into a conversation. So, floor is yours, Jordan.
Thank you. And Mike, first off, thank you for having me. I love getting the opportunity to be able to tell more about myself and me as a candidate, but also talk about voters' issues. I'm Jordan Wheatley. I'm a fourth grade public school teacher who spends most of my time in a classroom. And I'm running for U.S. Congress here in Texas's 3rd Congressional District. And so, I've seen not only experience, but seen firsthand just how broken our system is, Mike. And, I walk into my classroom every day and I see my students who are bright, creative, and full of hope. It is that hope and excitement for the future that when you parallel it with the reality of what's happening outside of my classroom, there's a stark difference. And so I believe that my students deserve better. We deserve better. And that is exactly why I am running for Congress.
Okay. That is I think, about as good enough reason as anything. So I know on your website you had listed education as one of your highest priorities. And first off, Uh, teaching, I think, is a very noble and undervalued profession. So, really appreciate the work that you are doing there in the classroom. Now, I know education was one of your, actually, was listed last time I looked as the first priority on your website. Given that most of the funding for local schools come from the state and local school districts' property taxes, and the state and has more influence on actual curriculum through the State Board of Education. I'm wondering, why Congress? Why not state rep, state senator, State Board of Education? What do you expect? What do you hope to do in Congress with education?
Well, I think there's a lot that we can do at the federal level with education, and that we can gain bipartisan support for as well. So, in particular, when we talk about funding for our schools, when we pass it down from the federal government to the school system, we lose a pretty large percentage, larger than you would believe, of the amount of funding just through red tape. Basically, they pass it down from person to person, and each person takes a piece of the pie, per se, right? And
Hmm.
so, one of the things we can do pretty quickly is streamline this process, right? We can go straight from the federal government straight to your school, just like they do, just like the IRS does with us on our tax returns. That is one of the things. But also, right now, under this current administration, education's under attack more than it has been in the past, probably.
Oh yeah, they're trying to take apart the Department of Education.
And when they're doing that, they're taking away protections as well.
Hmm.
So when we talk about this funding that they've withheld $7 billion, now they have released some here and there, but this is specifically focused on schools like ours right here in our district, right? Title One, secondary. If you're an English learner, your first language wasn't English. We have quite a few students in this district whose first language wasn't English, and
Right.
they're withholding funds that were promised by federal law to be distributed to these schools by July the 1st, and they are
Right.
still withholding them. So what I see right now is that I can make the most difference and the most change at the federal level, and I can do it quickly and bipartisanly because at the end of the day, education matters not just to us as Democrats, but it matters to everybody.
Hmm. Okay. So One thing that I'm curious about that I'm asking most candidates about is, there's an old joke about economists that you get two different economists in a room, they'll have three different theories about what's going on. I think Democrats are even worse. If you get two Democrats in a room, you'll have at least four different theories about what we're doing wrong with messaging. Uh, I think the best gauge to go on is what we are actually hearing from voters. And I mean, not just inside the activist bubble with the people likely to contribute and volunteer for primary campaigns this early on, but what the run-of-the-mill voter is thinking who isn't really paying a lot of attention, and especially folks who are typically kind of not engaged or maybe voting for the other party. So, what are you hearing from group, both groups of people? What are you hearing on the ground so far? And how much are you getting out of the Democratic bubble?
Well, I'll say this, Mike. We show up anywhere and everywhere. I
Hmm.
talk to you at the gas station. I talk to people who work at the grocery store. I go to parks with my dogs. I talk to voters all across the spectrum. And,
Hmm.
believe it or not, my first question isn't, are you a Democrat? You
Well, it
know,
shouldn't be.
we talk about how, I'm a teacher, and that usually leads
Hmm.
into them telling you, oh, I have a child in this school, and that leads into their issue. And so what I
Hmm.
can say that I've noticed is that no matter whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or independent, or you just don't know what you are and you're just looking for a home, right? Or you're tuned out, like you said, or you just don't care. What I
Or
have seen
you
is,
don't vote.
yeah, you're a non-voter, right? And
Hmm.
what I've seen is that these values, these issues are common across all of us. Like I said, I mean, we all want a strong education system. We all want affordable health care. And we all want an economy that works. And so those are all talking points, no matter the demographic that we are, visiting with, sitting down with. I think what's most important when you're out talking to voters and what we focus on is actually showing up and listening. I think we
Hmm.
too often, and I won't say we, but politicians too often go in and talk at you instead of
Hmm.
talk with you. And so in this campaign, and in my vision is sit down, listen first, let them tell you what their issues are, and ask questions. How can we make it better? Right. And that's the key point here. I don't think that there's a right way to message because every candidate is different. But
Hmm.
I think what is important is showing up, being present, and actively listening to your people, your representatives, or your constituents' needs.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a pretty basic approach. Not nearly enough people follow it. How often are you kind of getting, once you're talking, you start a conversation with somebody. One thing that I hear from candidates frequently is as soon as, you get into something, they ask, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And as soon as you tell them you're a Democrat, they immediately shut you off. Are you running into that very much at all?
Actually, I'm not. But the way I approach this is, like I said, these values are common across all the spectrum of across the political spectrum in general. And
Right,
so when I'm talking to a voter, like I said, I don't ask if they're a Democrat. They don't normally ask me. I
right.
start with building that rapport, listening to their story, figuring out who that voter is and the background they come from. And then that usually leads us into the issues. And when we talk about the issues, we align. And so when I usually finish that conversation, I always say, and I'm a Democrat, by the way. And 95% of the time, people will say, I don't care. You're a good person and we need good people, right? And
Mm,
so that's what I focus on. I focus on the voter, who they are, and what they want to see. Because at the end of the day, if I win this election, like I have to represent everybody, not just
right.
Democrats, right? And so I want to be able to do that. And so that's why I'm showing up and I'm listening.
So, in your conversation with folks, as you're talking about issues and they're bringing stuff up, um, I we talked a lot about the education. Sorry. Um, what other families of issues are people bringing up? What are the other things that you would like to work on if you do get elected?
I think one of the largest issues, and this is true across the entire political spectrum as well, is restoring integrity to our government. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is that these non-voters, they're not voting because, it's boring or they just don't want to. Most of the time they're voting because they don't believe we can change the system, because it's been the same old system for far too long. And we have politicians like our representative Keith Self, who, just voted on this big, beautiful bill, knowingly that it was going to hurt our people right here in Congressional District 3. I mean, he even called it a morally corrupt bill, and, that it was flawed, and less than a day later voted for it. It's that very same, you know, common theme of a politician walks up and they say, when they're at your house or your church or your school, wherever they're at, and they're talking to you, they're telling you what you want to hear, but when push comes to shove, they're turning their back and selling you out. And so that's one of the biggest issues that we have with government, and why I'm able to connect with voters so well is because I've experienced that from both sides. And I want to make sure that if elected, that we have transparency across the board in my congressional campaign and in my congressional office.
Okay. That is somewhat related to a theme that I've kind of been exploring lately. And it has a lot to do with politics because it gets manifested in politics, but it really has to do more with the kind of society we're living in.
Mm.
I mean, I'm quite a bit older than you are, so I have a little bit more of a historical perspective about how things used to be. But the way I like to talk about it is, back when we had three broadcast TV networks, and you got Walter Cronkite, Huntley and Brinkley, or I even forget who the third one it was. Everybody kind of watched the same TV shows. There wasn't this thousands of streaming choices. You had AM pop top 40 radio. You didn't have Spotify. And all of this stuff. And, not that the 50s and 60s were not without their share of problems, but there was a consensus about values. Um, like you had the sheriff who came in and cleaned up the town, and ran out the evil cattle baron or had a gunfight with him or something. And these days, rather than the sheriff going after the evil cattle baron who tramples down the farmers' fences, we elected the damn guy. Uh, so uh, America's always been a melting pot. We don't have a
Mhm.
shared culture like many of the nations in Europe or Africa or Asia, even for that matter. So what you're talking about integrity, about what you're seeing in the kids in school, I think the kids you're having in school are, I'm sure, a reflection of what they're getting at home.
Mhm.
And I see politics as a consequence of culture. They're interrelated, but I think the problems we have are deeper than just political. They're cultural. We've kind of lost our way, if we ever had it, about what America is about. So, what are you seeing in kids, and how do you kind of relate my rambling here to your call for more integrity in government?
Well, I'll say this. When I step in my classroom every day, I see in my students myself growing up. So
Hmm.
I grew up in West Virginia. I
Okay.
grew I grew up in a double wide trailer in a holler, if you know what that
Mm.
is.
Oh yeah.
And my dad was a coal miner, my mom was a school bus driver.
Mm.
And so we had this sense of community. No
Hmm.
matter who you were, my parents raised me to do what is right before
Hmm.
everything else. It was
Right.
never a question of, were you a Christian? Were you a Democrat? Were you a Republican? It was, what did that person need and how could I help them? And
Right.
my parents were like that and still are like that across, our entire lives. And they taught me that.
Hmm.
And so what I'm seeing is, and when I talk to these parents, because we get to do parent teacher conferences,
Oh
which
yeah. Yeah.
are
Yeah.
can be fun. um, but when you
Fun.
talk to yeah, when you talk to these parents, you realize that when those kids step through my door, they're bringing a lot of their home life with them.
Oh
And
yeah.
so you're realizing that some of these parents are working two jobs.
Right.
Dad is only here once a week, one day a week, every other 2 weeks because he's having to travel to find work. Some of them don't, have dads around. Some of them don't have moms around. Some of them are being raised by grandparents. But it all
Mm,
goes back to, you said that politics, and I believe that they're all intersectional as well. But it goes back to we have allowed a system to grow to what it is today that has not only increased the wealth gap, but is
mm,
making people like us work even harder just to survive.
right.
And so what you're seeing is the effect of that. You're seeing
Mhm.
kids come to school tired because they're having to help mom or dad at their business, like I did growing up. You're having kids who are coming to school hungry because they can't afford food to put on the table, right?
Right.
And my question is, are our values absent, or are we having to prioritize survival over those at the moment? And I think that that's where, Trump in general grabbed a hold of, was this anger for change, this hunger for change in general. And people are mad. I mean, I myself am frustrated with this system when I clearly see that there are places we can make improvement that are bipartisan, common sense solutions, education being one of them. And instead, we have leaders who are putting politics over the people they were elected to represent. And then who pays the price? It's people like you and I. And so what I'm seeing is a result of a broken system where we have individuals who are overworked, underappreciated, and barely making it. And we've got to do something different.
So you say they're putting politics above the needs of the people. Who is benefiting from those politics? Because politics doesn't happen in a vacuum.
You're right.
Somebody always wins.
Well, and that's the truth, right? I mean, a great example, once again, is our Congressman Keith Self, who, like I said the bill, big beautiful bill, was flawed.
Hmm.
Talked about how it was morally corrupt, and voted for it anyways. And when asked in interviews what he got for voting for that bill, he can't
Hmm.
answer, because who's benefiting from it? It's him. We didn't get anything. He got something, or his
Yeah.
donors did, or his small little circle that is less than 1% of the population. That's who's
Right.
benefiting, right?
Hmm.
The people who are lining the pockets of our politicians, because we have created a system that it's rigged against us, Mike.
Hmm.
And it's not supposed to be, which is why we
Right.
need real people in there who bring not only their experience but bring real solutions to the table, and always remember who they're supposed to represent.
Right. Yeah, I agree completely. It's interesting that I think you will hear occasionally similar rhetoric from some of the more populist uh, folks on the right, but when it comes down to it, that's not how they vote.
Mm-mm.
They're concerned about being primaried by you know who. Uh, so one other thing I wanted to ask you about is, again, speaking of that person, he has asked for 5 more Republican seats in Congress out of Texas. Um, the legislature is meeting now. An initial map got posted to the redistricting website. Um, there have been another 58 maps submitted when I checked yesterday. As far as I know, there isn't a committee version yet, and the news reports that I saw yesterday or today said that the hearing scheduled for Austin by the House Redistrict Committee got adjourned early by the chairman, and they did not present a map. So it's looking like to me, I don't know. My hunch is either they're either not going to come to a consensus and not have a map, or else they're going to be bullied into passing something and making the districts narrower margins. because you got to take voters from somewhere and move them somewhere else. They did such a job gerrymandering the last time with 60-40 districts that they're going to have to create some of the lower margins to uh, take votes, break those safer Democratic districts. So it's kind of a long way around of asking. I think the consensus among the folks I have talked to is that they would probably further dilute the Democratic strength in Collin County. Not that we're overwhelming Democratic by any means, but Plano is pretty purple. And other parts are getting that way too. Further dilute that by stretching the district probably out east or north to bring in more rural, supposedly Republican voters. So that would change who you would need to be talking to. Are you hearing anything differently from like folks out in, Greenville, farther east into, those counties close to the Red River and Texarkana and stuff? Or how much have you talked to those folks yet?
Well, I'll say
I,
this.
I, I would say, they have the same concerns about school, probably more school concern about schools than a lot of the office holders in Austin. I'll just put it that way.
No, you're correct. And I'll say this. What we're seeing is Republicans are scared to deal with or face their unpopular policies. They know they're
Mhm.
unpopular. They know they're about to lose seats. And so they're attempting to rig the system even more than it is. But the truth is, we also don't know what those maps are going to look like,
Right.
right? But what I can say is that no matter what, my messaging will stay the same. We're going to be
Right.
showing up, talking to voters, asking them what matters to them so we can learn how to better represent them. And speaking of rural voters, Hunt County has rural voters, and I love
Hmm.
going out. I love going out there because I grew up, like I said, in rural West Virginia,
Hmm.
and so I can tell you that from my own experience, I've seen firsthand how these bad policies, particularly the Big Beautiful Bill that just got passed,
Hmm.
will affect those rural areas first.
Right.
We're often the ones, that are overlooked immediately and never thought about. But we're the ones who carried this country and helped build it to what it is. We were the blue collar workers who showed up when people needed us the most, you know, and we are often the ones overlooked.
Right.
And so, what I relate with the most with them is that exact fact. But like I said, the message doesn't change. Our message,
Right.
my message doesn't change. We're going to show up. If it's 25 counties, we're going to show up in all 25 counties, Mike. We're going to
Okay.
be there. We're going to represent and we're going to listen because that's what we need.
Okay. Well, that's the way to run a campaign. So we're I think covered most of what I wanted to talk about in this interview anyway. What closing words would you have for people?
Well, as someone who has grown up a product of this broken system, defied everything that was, or every roadblock that was set up against me. And I primarily did it through education. And as a teacher now, I'm seeing firsthand how these bad policies and bad politics, quite frankly, are affecting our children right here, right now. And so with me, you get a leader who not only has lived those experiences, sees them every day, but I'm bringing real solutions to the table, Mike, and I'm ready to get the work done because at the end of the day, that's what matters. Having a representative that's ready to fight for you, and that's who I am, a fighter.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Good luck to you, and I'm sure we haven't seen the last of you.
Well, I thank you, Mike, for having me on, and hopefully I get to see you soon.
Okay, we'll talk again later.
All right.